Champions for Hire.
Welcome back to another episode of GMs for Hire. The college football boys are back. Myself, Jamil, and RJ. We're about to talk about some college football. It's been a very, very long time, but we're here with some exciting news. The college football playoff is expanding now. At first, me and RJ were talking about, give me 18 playoff. We could talk about an 18 playoff, but no. The college football committee is going to be a 12-team playoff now. RJ, how do you feel about that?
Well, you mentioned we were going to come on here and talk about, how many teams, what's the right number. And me and you both agreed that 8 teams is the best. I had a whole format laid out in the notes section of my phone. Like I had it ready to go. It was lit. And then the very next day we get the news that it's going to be potentially a 12-team playoff. I think 12 is too much. That's my personal opinion. I don't think, if you go back and look at who has finished, 11th or 12th in the rankings the last 5 or 6 years, and you tell me if they are worthy of being in the playoff. My answer is no. Last year, Indiana was number 11, and they only played 5 or 6 games, and their star quarterback tore his ACL. Last year, Indiana would have been in the playoff, and I think that's a wasted spot. Now, I, as a major college football fan, am tired of Bama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma every year. So I definitely want new blood in, and I do think expanding the playoff is necessary. I don't know that 12 is the correct answer. I thought 8 would have been better because you're still just taking the best of the best and not getting some mediocre teams that really don't need to be in there. I will say what we have seen in this proposed format so far, everything's still a proposal. They're going to meet next week in Chicago to talk about it and all that. But as we've seen so far, the proposal so far, they would take the top 6 conference champions, and then they would take 6 wildcard teams, basically. I will say that I like that. I like that no conference is guaranteed to make the playoff. So if you look at last year, the American Athletic Conference and the Sun Belt, shout out Coastal, the Sun Belt would have gotten into the playoff last year, and the Pac-12 would have still missed the playoff, which I agree with. There was not a Pac-12 team that deserved to be there. So I will say, even though I think 12 is too many, the way they're getting to the 12, I think is the right answer. 6 conference champions and 6 wild cards.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. We both thought 8 was the best. When I saw 12, I was like, it could be too much. But when I saw the format, I said, all right, I can get behind this. It's a pretty fire format. The one thing that I didn't like about college football, how you said, the same 4 teams to make the playoffs. I thought it sucked for over half the country, the only college sport where when the season starts, your goal isn't to win the conference champ. Your goal isn't to go to a national championship. Your goal is just to go to a conference championship. If you're the Sun Belt, if you're the Mountain West, if you're the WAC, if you're the MAC, all these teams, your coach, you said, all right, guys, go in the conference championship. And if you're the Sun Belt, we're going to play in the Battery Bowl in Louisiana, in New Orleans. That's the best bowl you can get. So I like that now, you can set the standard, and you can say, hey, if we do our job, there's a chance that now we can be in the playoffs and go play for national championship. Yeah, it's going to be a tough road. Yeah, we're going to get tough matchups, but the fact that you can go and play for a chance, I think is big. I think it's big for football in general.
Absolutely. I think it opens the door for, like you said, the Sun Belt. They know realistically when their season starts, they have no shot of making the college football playoff. But now that's not the case, because if you look a couple years ago, I don't remember the exact year, but Appalachian State was ranked. I mean, they only had 1 loss. They might have been undefeated, honestly. And it was October or November. They were really good. They were really high ranked. And I think they were battling with a couple American teams to figure out who was going to be the highest ranked group of 5 champion. Well, now it's going to be 6 conferences, and it doesn't really matter if it's the group of 5 or not. So now you could have a team like Appalachian State, like Coastal Carolina last year. I know Louisiana is getting a lot of hype this year. It's opening the door for those teams to where they actually have a legitimate shot at making the playoff. The other thing I like is, now that we're going to have 6 wild cards, there's a lot of teams, especially in the Pac-12 and the Big 12. When you get that first loss, your season's kind of over. because there really isn't going to be a spot for you to make the playoff because you already have lost a game. Now, the flip side of that, college football's regular season is the best regular season in all of sports because every game matters. Now, are you telling me that every game matters? If hypothetically, say Georgia loses week 1 this year to Clemson, okay? Then they mow through the SEC East and they win every game, but then they go and lose the SEC championship to Alabama. Now, Georgia's sitting there 10-2. Their only losses are Clemson and Alabama. 2-loss Georgia is in the playoff. Like there's not going to be a discussion there. And now you potentially could have, a 1-loss Pac-12 team that still gets screwed out of it because not every game holds the same weight. We've seen it the past couple years, good losses, good wins, things like that. But the beauty of college football's regular season is every game matters. By letting more teams in, I'm not really sure that every game holds the same amount of weight.
I hear what you're saying with that, and to an extent, I do agree. But where I'm going to throw a little wrench in your plan right there is, I think the regular season, I think we're going to see more high-ranked games at a conference against each other, because now your ultimate goal is to win your conference title, because that's your automatic path in. So now if you're one of those Pac-12 teams, you gotta add a couple ranked teams to your schedule, because your the Pac-12 I think is arguably the weakest Power 5 right now.
Absolutely.
The ACC, I don't think the ACC is that strong outside of a couple of teams. But if you're these teams, you got to stack up your regular season with 1 or 2 ranked teams outside, because if you get a win, let's say you play 2 good ranked teams and you split, you got a really good ranked game on your resume when you're battling out with these other 5 teams that's in the at large. Because let's face it, I think the SEC is every year is arguably going to put in at least 2 wild cards at
least.
So
at least
really, it's a 4-team race if you ask me right now, because the conference is so strong, and we know the bias is there sometimes. So at that point, the Big Ten's also strong. They could easily get 2-3 teams. So really, now you're looking at 2 or 3 open spots between the Pac-12, ACC, and the AAC.
Yeah, I do think it's funny. So this is just me talking, but the whole reason the college football playoff came to be is because we didn't want computers, this and that. You've heard everyone's excuses as to, we hated the BCS. The BCS really wasn't that bad. What pissed everybody off was 2011 when it was 2 SEC teams in the national championship. Now, so they said, you know what? We need the playoff. We'll get more teams in. Cool. The SEC won't dominate. Well, guess what? We got 4 teams. The SEC is always in. Alabama's always in. Georgia's made it a few times. LSU had their run. The SEC still dominates. So they're trying again. They're expanding the playoff again, hoping they can get some of these SEC teams out. But what's going to happen when we have a year where you got an undefeated Alabama, okay? Say Texas A&M, their only loss was to Alabama. So you have a 1-loss A&M. Then over on the East, you got Georgia and Florida. Say one of them goes undefeated, and the other one's only loss is to the team that was undefeated.
Yeah.
So now you got
teams.
4. Yeah. So there's 4 SEC teams that are going to be in regardless. And then don't forget LSU. What if LSU has a couple big-time wins? They could get in over a Pac-12 team. The SEC is still going to dominate. It really doesn't matter how many teams you let in. But I'm glad you brought up winning your conference is such a big deal. There's a giant elephant in the room right now when we talk about conferences, and that's Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I believe this format is going to force Notre Dame to join a conference. I understand we still have the 6 wild cards, but nobody wants to be a wild card. Hypothetically here, in a couple years, I don't know the exact year, in a couple years, Notre Dame is going to play Clemson and Ohio State in the same season. The same season, okay? If Notre Dame goes undefeated that year with wins over Clemson and Ohio State, they still won't be one of the top 4 teams in the playoff, because those are reserved for the top 4 conference champions. So Notre Dame could literally go 12-0 with wins over Clemson and Ohio State and still have to play a first-round game because they aren't a conference champion. That's a huge disadvantage. That's an extra game that Notre Dame would have to play that, the champions wouldn't. I think this forces Notre Dame's hand. I absolutely think they will be in the ACC or Big Ten within the next few years.
See, I've had this discussion with other people too, and you made a tremendous point there. You know, if you go undefeated with all those games, like, and they're not even going to throw you a loophole, like, oh, if they do this, they get a top 4 seed. They don't have that, but I'm in the camp where they're just never going to not be an independent, because to me, the money they get from NBC and that sponsorship is so big. And then their biggest recruiting advantage is that they can play these games all over the country, because let's face it, they're in smack dab in the middle of the United States in South Bend, Indiana. You know, it's not easy to convince people to go play in South Bend, Indiana, but when you can say, hey man, we're going to play in California at least twice a year. You're from California. Like, we'll get you to play in front of your family twice. We're going to play USC. We're going to play Stanford. We're going to play our Shamrock Heroes. We're going to play in these big NFL stadiums. We're going to play in Chicago. We're going to play in Dallas. I think that's such big in recruiting for them to get these players, because Notre Dame's a really high program, but they're not pulling in ridiculous amounts of 5 stars every season. They're getting 4 stars and 3 stars and sprinkling 5 stars. So I think for them that their biggest bargaining chip is being able to play all these games and to go to all these places, that going to a conference hurts them in recruiting to me.
Well, a little, but at the same time, yeah, the NBC money, that's number one here. Everything has to do with money in this world. And yes, as long as Notre Dame is getting the whole pie of the NBC money, it's going to be hard to turn that down. But on the other hand, now, Notre Dame, I think they can figure out a way to keep their partnership with NBC and also join a conference and just split the money up to where whatever conference they join, every school is going to get a little bump. Now, I'm not smart enough to sit in that room and have those discussions, but I bet if you got the NBC executives, the ACC executives, and Notre Dame, chancellors or presidents, whoever's in charge of that, sit them down, be like, look, we still want 5 of our games to be on NBC every year. We'll have a couple of them on ESPN, a couple of them ACC Network, whatever. The more eyes will go to the ACC. Every ACC school's money will go up. So Notre Dame really wouldn't be taking a huge pay cut. I still think they could figure out a way to make the money work. And then as far as traveling to all these big games, what teams play, 12 or 13 games. Only 9 or 10 of them are conference games. You still have 2 or 3 out of conference games. You can still go schedule USC, still go get Michigan, Stanford, all your little rivalries you got. Notre Dame can still do that. Now, is that fair when Clemson's out here playing Charleston Southern and Notre Dame's playing USC? Probably not, but that helps you at the end of the year when we're talking about strength of schedule and things like that. I think Notre Dame, yes, the way they schedule, their strength of schedule is always going to be, one of the top ones. But if you aren't a conference champion, you aren't going to be one of the top 4 seeds. Now, you mentioned a loophole. That's one thing I don't want to see is college football be like, oh, well, Notre Dame, we'll give them the top seed. No. The rule says, as y'all have it right now, still a proposal, says the top 4 seeds are the top 4 conference champions. That's what it says. Notre Dame would not be a conference champion. There should be no exception for them. I think Notre Dame's going to join a conference.
Well, we'll see what happens with them, but like you said with those networks, that I can never see a world where ESPN comes in agreement with NBC over that, because basically Notre Dame already does that by playing their home games on NBC and all the road games on ESPN. So I don't see where they would go and do that. But it could be interesting to see if they have a season like that and they get screwed. If they say, you know what, man, let's sit down and think about this. That right there would definitely be interesting. But like you mentioned, the conference champions get in. We talked about earlier, how you said the BCS wasn't that bad and we got voting. That leads me into this. Like you said last year, Coastal Carolina, they would have been in, like the way the season ended. But if we had this format, would they truly have been in? We talk about teams getting screwed over. It's happened a couple of years here and there. These lower teams outside of the Power 5, with 12 teams, it's okay. Now they have a chance to get in. But at the end of the day, there's still human voting and people can still get screwed over.
Well, the thing is, so if it comes down to being a wild card, yeah, you can bet 9 times out of 10, the little school is going to get screwed. That's an absolute. If we're picking who that, number 6 wild card is going to be, and it's between Auburn or it's between Houston, Auburn's going to get it. The little team will always get screwed. What I don't want to see is, me and you were talking about it last year. Coastal Carolina was undefeated. They were the Sun Belt champions. Oregon was 4-2, only played 6 games. They were ranked number 25 as Pac-12 champions. Would we ever see a scenario where the playoff committee says, you know what, Oregon, they won their conference championship, we can bump them up and then screw them by putting them above a conference champion from the Sun Belt? I think if that happens, personally, that is when the group of 5 will get together and leave. And I think the group of 5 would start their own playoff, because you cannot screw a team worse than you could have screwed Coastal last year. If the playoff would have pulled something like that, where a 2-loss Pac-12 champion gets in over an undefeated Coastal who had a win over a previously undefeated BYU, I think that right there would be the tipping point to where the group of 5 says, you know what, we're out. We're not doing this anymore, because we literally do not have a chance to compete with you guys. So, yeah, there's always going to be that controversy. Teams can always get screwed because there's money involved. And these old guys that are sitting in the committee, they're going to want the best ratings. They're going to want the best TV matchups, because television plays a big part in this. I would hope that a team that deserves to get in wouldn't get screwed, but I think me and you both know the answer to that one.
Yeah, sadly, when there's if there's able to be a screw job, it will happen to the lower teams. But like you said, you mentioned Oregon last year. They got in by default too into their conference championship. But it will suck if a team gets to their conference championship and they're not having the best season, but they just happen to be the best team on their side, and they pull the upset over the really good team. So then at that that point is, if that team gets upset, now they're a wild card team, and that screws down the lower team.
Exactly. That's something that I wonder if the conference, the presidents would have a problem with. I don't know if you remember, I know you do. A few years ago, in the Jim McElwain era of the Florida Gators, they were not good. They were 8-4.
But they kept making the SEC championship.
But they made the SEC championship. What if they would have upset Alabama one of those years? Now, the SEC champion isn't getting in. Florida's not making the playoff.
They shouldn't, but you never know. That's the thing. They shouldn't make the playoffs in that scenario, but if they did. I
still don't think it would happen, because all the other conference champions would be above Florida, and now you're relegating Alabama to a wild card. So now, if you're the commissioner of the SEC, you're like, wait a minute. We just totally got screwed. Like, we could have had our champion in, and now Bama's fighting for a wild card. 9 times out of 10, Bama's going to get the benefit of the doubt, and it's going to be another conference that gets screwed out of a wild card. But still, that's going to hurt conferences in getting multiple teams into the playoff now. You're going to need the favorite to win the championship game every year.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because if you get something like in the Pac-12, if USC goes and plays like Colorado, and Colorado's got 3 losses, and they pull off the upset, USC's going from a 2 seed to the 6 seed.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
And then that retrospect, like we said, screws over the AAC team that won their conference, or the Sun Belt team that was undefeated and won their conference. Hey, sorry, but USC, they're getting in the playoffs, so that means everybody's bumping down.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that definitely can add some late season excitement, though. If you get an upset like that, you're like, whoa, like this team just got beat. Like, now let's see what shakes out. So we're still gonna have drama on Selection Sunday.
Well, yeah, and so that's the thing. I'm hearing these experts talking about conference championship games aren't going to matter anymore, and I don't agree with that at all. I'm not understanding what their reasoning is in that, because now, say you have a scenario like 15, is that when it was? Alabama, Florida's not good. If Florida wins that game, now Alabama's a wild card. Like, the conference championship actually, absolutely matters. I understand that the game wouldn't necessarily matter for an Alabama, because Alabama knows that they are in the playoff regardless. They just won't be a top 4 seed. Now they're a wild card. So I get that. But those conference championships are going to matter even more, because now you have those wild card teams that are like, whoa, Alabama needs to win this game because if they don't, they're going to be in our pool and one of us is going to get screwed. So I heard some of these experts talking about, the regular season won't matter as much. I kind of get that, but I kind of don't, because like what you were saying, I think we'll get more out of conference games. I think we'll get some big non-conference games to open up these seasons. But the conference championship games not mattering, I don't understand what that argument is. I really don't. If someone wants to comment under this video and try to explain that to me, I'm fine with that. I will say this, if you want to talk about games not, really mattering and things like that, rivalry games. So in 2016, Ohio State was number 2 and Michigan was number 3, or it might have been the other way around, whatever. Michigan and Ohio State were 2 and 3, and they played each other rivalry weekend, one of the biggest rivalries we got in the sport, but it was also basically a playoff game, because if you lost that game, you knew you weren't going to make the playoff. And if you won that game, there's a pretty good shot you're going to make the playoff. If that were to happen again, that game doesn't mean as much. Now, people in Ohio, people in Michigan, calm down. I get it. That rivalry will always matter. It doesn't matter if they're 5-7 and 6-6. That rivalry is always going to mean something. But in the national landscape and in the grand scheme of things, that game is one of the best college football games I ever watched, because it was literally do or die. In this scenario, it's not do or die. It's just beat your rival, which is still a big deal. But the loser of that game still would get in a playoff because we have more wild cards now. So that's the one thing I don't want to see, is some of that get watered down. But honestly, I can find more positives than negatives about this new scenario.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with that. When you first hear 12 teams, you get turned off. You're like, oh, that's way too many. Like you said, I think that's too many. But, when we see the layout, when we see all the nuances of like what it's going to look like what has to happen for this to happen, I like the wild cards. I think we have a really solid format. I'm glad that we can possibly see some non-Power 5 teams get a chance to play for all the glory. And I'm interested to see what this is going to do for recruiting now too, because, now you have these non-Power 5 teams. Obviously, they're not going to go out and get all these 5 stars, but now it'll be interesting to see, the transfer portal is already big, but now let's see, if it helps out these non-Power 5 teams, get even more people to come in. If you're not playing at a high-profile school, you can say, hey, I can go here, show out, and now we have a chance to possibly play on the national stage.
Yeah, that's another thing, is it could help some of these schools. If you have a conference, let's be real, every one of the group of 5 conferences has that major team, that number 1 team that kind of dominates. The the AAC, it was UCF. I guess right now it's Cincinnati. But you can look at one of those schools and be like, look, yeah, it's not a big conference, but I can go there. We can go 10, 11-1 or whatever, and we're going to make the playoff. But if I go to LSU, yeah, it's a bigger stage. Yeah, you got all the pageantry, the tradition, all that. But we might go 10-2 and miss the playoff. I could go to one of these schools. I could be a big fish in a small pond instead of a small fish in the Atlantic Ocean, the SEC. So you could have a school like Appalachian State or Coastal that dominates, or Louisiana this year, that dominates the Sun Belt. Now that's very attractive, because I have a better shot of making the playoff at UCF or Coastal Carolina than I do at Texas A&M, which sounds ridiculous, but it kind of is the truth. Look at Boise State in the Mountain West. Boise State absolutely owns that conference. Boise State now is a very attractive destination, because you just win your conference, you have a very good shot of getting into the playoff.
What's crazy? You mentioned Boise State in the Mountain West. I saw this chart, and if this playoff format would have been involved over like the past 12, 15 years, TCU would have made the playoffs 4 or 5 times. They would be the best school in Texas by far.
Yeah.
If this would I'm just thinking about what it would have done for that school, because they're already good. Gary Patterson already does a heck of a job. He's one of the most underrated coaches in the sport. But if you're a team like that and you make the playoffs multiple times, Texas was already in shambles a couple years ago. A&M's just now getting good again with Jimbo. TCU could have ran the state, and they could have gotten multiple high-profile recruits, and I think that would have been that's what can separate some of these schools. Like you mentioned Boise State. Now Boise State doesn't like, I know they've been flirting with joining the AAC and going to other conferences, but now I'm interested to see what this is going to do for conference realignment, because now, you know, you're not necessarily like, you can possibly make the playoffs now in one of these lower conferences. Obviously, we're going to have another realignment within the next decade. We're going to have another big one, I think, within the next 10 years. But, you know, a team like Boise State doesn't necessarily have to go to the AAC now, because if they can take care of business in the Mountain West, they have a path to be the 11th or 12th seed.
Yep, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, that you don't really need to join, you know, a Power 5 conference to make the playoff now. Now, I think that is a big win for the group of 5 conferences, because the American Athletic Conference, if they lost UCF or they lost Cincinnati or Houston, that'd be huge, man. Those are big markets. Those are big schools that the American really needs in their conference. You lose those, it's going to hurt those little conferences more and more. This is a great way to preserve and protect those little conferences. And I love that.
Yeah, that's definitely agree right there. And one other thing about the transfer portal, you know, one position that I think is going to be big in the transfer, like quarterback, obviously only one can play. They all move around, but I think a lot of them try to move to another P5 school. Now you can get these guys, they can go start immediately at one of these non-P5s and start and possibly make the playoffs too. I think that's going to be big for some of these other schools to get some of these former high-touted quarterbacks, which is fun because, you know, it's the biggest position in the game. You know, you want to get drafted high, and you only have so many years, only one can play.
Well, that. I have a whole rant about transferring and things like that. If you're a star quarterback, hypothetically, who's say Ohio State, they've got CJ Stroud right now. They just got the number 1 quarterback for 2022, Quinn Ewers, or however you say his name. If you're in the class of 22 or 23 and you're a quarterback, why would you go to Ohio State? That makes no sense to me. You know you are not going to start. So to me, that's a common sense thing. And that's where some of these kids got to realize, look, I'm not going to go there. And yes, you got to be confident in yourself. Oh, I can beat that kid. But hypothetically, like, be realistic. If they got their guy and he's a 5-star guy, why would you go there thinking you're going to go and unseat him? I said the same thing about Justin Fields. Yes, Justin Fields was better than Jake Fromm. Absolutely. He's a better quarterback. But Georgia had their guy. It was very apparent Jake Fromm was going to be the guy. Hell, before that, they had Jacob Eason, who was like a 5-star. Justin Fields should have never went to Georgia. Don't go to Georgia and get everyone's hopes up and then be like, you know what, I'm out. Well, no, you knew who they had. So that goes back to recruiting. But yes, I absolutely agree. The transfer portal is going to be flooded with high-profile quarterbacks. And yeah, I think this can make college football more balanced, and I think we can see more parity, which is great.
Yeah, I also hope this puts the smaller schools on the map nationally more with more big television games, because I know me and you, we watch all the games. Like we watched Coastal Carolina or Coastal multiple times, like before week 9 when they're undefeated. Like I watched them in week 2, and I said, this Grayson McCall dude's gross. I said,
dude, he's gross.
And then people started noticing he was gas.
Grayson McCall is the new Mackenzie Milton. That dude's a star.
Yeah, he's gas. So like now I hope these teams get, well, obviously they're still going to play on noon on ESPNU, but yeah, I hope that they can throw in like a nighttime game, like a Sun Belt, like a Coastal versus Louisiana. Like I hope they can play on ESPN, not ESPNU. I hope they can play at 12, 3:30. I just hope more people tune in to watch these guys now, because these lower schools have ballers and people don't realize it. So they pick their NFL team picks and they say, oh, this dude was good. Where was he the whole time in college? Like he was there. You just weren't watching.
Exactly. What really pissed me off last year was that huge game, Coastal Carolina, BYU. It was a night game. College Game Day was there. It was huge. And it came on ESPNU at like 6 o'clock.
Yeah, it was like 4:35, 6. It was like at an off time on ESPNU. Yeah, that hurts.
And that honestly, if I had to rank it, that was one of the 5 best college football games I watched last year. And it came on at 6 o'clock on ESPNU. Like that, be smarter, guys.
Yeah, I definitely think with this format, we have a better chance of seeing a lot more players, a lot more teams. I think overall it's going to be really good for the sport because I think the exposure is going to be there. You know, people are already going to tune in for the excitement of college football. Like you said, it has the best regular season of arguably any sport in America. So I think the regular season can still be successful because I think we're still going to see a lot of big games, especially early in the season. Um, I think it's good for the sport. How about you?
I do. I think overall, college football is, I mean, it's the best. It's so great. And it's really been hurting the last couple years because, like I mentioned, if your name isn't Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, or Oklahoma, you're probably not making the playoff. And so you've got, 5/6 of the country that don't care about it because they know they don't have a shot to make it. This opens the door. This gets everyone, you got to pay attention now. You have to care about it because you have a chance to make it. I think overall it's great.
There's two things I want to hit on to right before we end. Number one, obviously, the top four seeds, they get the bye, and then they go play in a neutral site game while the first round games play at home. I wonder if after a couple years, the top four teams say, hold on, wait a minute. So-and-so just played a home playoff game, and it was snowing. They had home field advantage, but we got to go play at a neutral site game. I wonder if in a couple of years, in Ohio State, who will probably be a top four team, it gets nasty in Columbus. They say, wait a minute, we want a home game. We want the revenue from the tickets. We want all this stuff. When do
that's going to be a problem?
Want a home game?
Yeah, that's going to be a problem specifically for the Big Ten. If Wisconsin gets into the playoff and has to host a first round game, or Penn State, or Iowa, or Michigan, that is not fair for the Florida Gators or the LSU Tigers. Ain't none of them boys ever seen snow before.
You have to go and play in the snow, and Wisconsin's going to run power 35 times a game. That's going to be brutal for the South teams for sure. But
absolutely,
on the flip side, if you're a Southern team, obviously it's not as high at the end of the year, but it's always hot in Florida. If Wisconsin's got to go down to Gainesville and play in the swamp, GG's to them because they're cramping up in the second quarter.
Well, that's when the SEC, if this is how we're going to do it and the Big Ten gets to host a playoff game, the SEC needs to be like, all right, bet. We're going to start scheduling Big Ten games, and we want to play them week 1 in our stadium because I want Wisconsin to come down to Gainesville on Labor Day weekend and have to sweat that one out.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be interesting, though. I think I could definitely see teams getting angry at that because, because on one hand, you have the bye week and you're playing in a dome, but you got to heal up. But on the other hand, they played at home. Like you said, money rules all. And these teams are going to want that gate revenue money because just one weekend of having a game between the tickets, the concessions, the hotels, like that's bigger than homecoming. Like that's huge for these little towns and stuff. So they're definitely going to want the money there.
Well, this is why 12 is too many and 8's perfect because no one gets by.
Yeah, but that is one of the problems with the 12 versus the 8. And then one last thing, it's what sucks about this is we're gonna lose some bowl games. Obviously, it's cool to have bowl weekend. A lot of people said there's already too many. That's an argument that could be had. Like on one hand, I see, on one hand, I don't, because like they're just fun. Like you get matchups that you don't often see. And I know you're a proponent of getting rid of the bowl tie-ins.
Yeah, so if we're going to eliminate bowl games, which I know we are, we're going to lose some bowl games. What I would like to see is the conference tie-ins that are connected to those bowls should go away. Because now, we live in Tampa. Let's use the Outback Bowl as an example. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa are the only Big Ten teams that ever come here. LSU is always here from the SEC. Once in a while, I think we got Florida, but usually it's the same teams. South Carolina does come a lot too. We always get the same teams. I think if there's going to be less bowls, I think we ought to do a system, and this is, kind of corrupt, but whatever, who cares? This is where money plays into it. I think the NCAA or college football, whoever runs the show, they're going to have a tiered system. All these bowl games, which there's going to be fewer, they're going to have to put up money. And you're going to have to pay to have the number 1 pick. So the Outback Bowl is going to have to hand the NCAA or whoever a $4 million check to say, you know what? we want the number 1 pick in the draft. Okay. So the Outback Bowl gets the first pick. They're going to be like, all right, the 2 best teams that didn't make the playoff. Oh, we're taking Michigan and we're taking Texas. Let's go. And go further on down the list. Yeah, it's not necessarily right for the little bowls that don't really have a lot of financial backing, but some of those little bowls don't need to be around. The Cure Bowl in Orlando, we do not need a Cure Bowl. You already have the Citrus Bowl and you already have the Camping World Bowl. Orlando does not need 3 bowls. It does not need to happen. So you could do it like that, and just pick the best teams. Like we live in Tampa. I want to see Texas here. I want to see North Carolina come here. I want to see the best matchups. I don't want 8-4 Iowa versus 9-3 Florida. We get it all the time, and I'm tired of it.
While I don't know if I would go as far as exchanging $1 million checks at the NCAA, I do see your point, and I would say that instead of doing something like that, maybe you can have, like, we'll keep the Outback Bowl as an example. The Outback Bowl is still played on New Year's Day. It's still one of the upper non-championship bowl games. So at that point, I think they should just start going off like the best teams that didn't make the playoffs go to the best bowl games. And I said the Outback Bowl is one of the top 5 bowl games that's not a playoff game. So you'd still get a top 15 matchup of something of the sorts, like a Texas versus North Carolina.
I agree with that. And that's exactly what I'm saying.
Just without paying the NCAA.
But, how do we determine what the best bowl games are?
When they're played, which is basically the games from New Year's on down.
Kinda, but I don't know. I think the big sponsor matters. I think playing in a nice stadium matters. Weather obviously matters. And yeah, I do believe the Outback Bowl is the best non-New Year's Six bowl, but how do we prove that? I think you prove it by putting up the most money.
Well, at that point, Outback has like the biggest sponsor out of all of them.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know, because that would cause all sorts of trouble. Players would be like, wait a minute, Outback just paid you off $4,000 a week, can't get $1. Okay. I can't sell my autograph. Okay.
Yeah.
That just leads down a road that I don't think anybody wants to go down.
No.
But I do agree that I hope that they could get rid of the times we could see some matchups we don't often get.
Yes. That's what I want also.
Well, that about does it for us here. RJ wants to even further corrupt the NCAA. I was just trying to be the middleman, but we're excited about college football coming up. We're in June, July's coming, which means August is right around the corner of football. So expect us to come out with some more preseason type videos. We're excited for the 12-team playoff. RJ, any last words?
No, just look out for, we're going to have conference predictions or conference previews. That's my word. Conference previews, but leading up to the season, we'll go through all the Power 5. We'll probably lump the group of 5 together, honestly. But yeah, we got some college football
as we were hyping them up. We're still going to give you all a full video each.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm not talking about y'all for 30 minutes.
Yeah, I'm not giving the Mac a 20-minute video. I just can't do it.
Well, they play on Tuesday, so I don't think they deserve a
exactly.
Video. If those games be hyped though, I'd be playing FanDuel on them.
Oh, absolutely. Last year, who was it? What was that stupid hype game? Oh, like Ohio and Toledo. That was.
Well, I'm not going to sleep on the Mac. Mac's got some players. My boy Jared Patterson had a 6-tub game, so I'm not going to sleep on them.
Yeah, he did. Yep, absolutely.
Well, for that, I'm Jamil. That was RJ, and this was our college football playoff 12-team review preview of what's going to happen. We'll see what the vote looks like, but it looks like this is going to be a lock. Everybody take care.